This is part 3 of In Unification's Wake on elegant reasonism, and the topic here is communications, but it's really about why it's so hard to articulate what this is and what this is all about to other people who are not initiated with the intricacies of the framework and the epistemology, and that seems like a fairly broad subject, but when you really understand how this all came to be, you'll see that it really could not have come together in any other way. So with that, let's just go through the normal disclosures here. The presentation charts are online. They're on solrei.co. You will need to register there and see it and download it. The best way to look at this presentation, these charts, is to log on to the website, bring up the PDF file on your computer, and then all of the blue hyperlinks will resolve to the respective pages back into the website. And they will not if you are not logged on. So that's the best way to get those. When we look at the abstract for this presentation, it really centers on commission of Langer epistemology errors. And if you're not familiar with the earlier videos that explain what those are, very simplistically, they are what happens when we mistake an abstraction for actual reality. Anytime those abstractions are mistaken, these kinds of errors are involved. And when we think we're working with reality rather than an abstraction of it, what happens is we get ensnared inside this big logic trap. And if the interpretive model that we are using to guide our thinking does not close to unification, then we kind of run around in a circle and we don't get anywhere. And so we need to kind of stop and back up and think about how we pull all this together. And as successful as the status quo thinking is, and all of the things that we've done in civilization to get the advanced technologies that we have, etc., we still have to ask the question, does that close to unification? And the answer is no. It's not that it doesn't close. The core constructs preclude closure, and that it cannot close. And that's kind of a big revelation. But elegant reasonism brings the framework supporting an epistemology that seeks truth as a function of the unified universe. And that approach grounds our thinking like nothing else in history has ever done. And to make a point here is that elegant reasonism is welded to the premise of the unified universe. It is not welded to any particular model, and that includes the model that we included with the patent, the emergence model. It is the first one that does close, but that doesn't mean that somebody else is not going to be able to come up with a better model than the one we came up with. Conducting an investigation using elegant reasonism and the emergence model as a basis is a different subject than trying to come up with a new model. That requires a specific kind of an investigation. That's a topic for a different video later. The earlier presentations describe what elegant reasonism is, the mechanics of it. Here, what we want to focus on is articulating a unified treatise, which is the result of some investigation, so that it becomes simple to the point of elegance. We want people to be able to wield elegant reasonism with ease, and we want them to feel comfortable with it. But be warned, that requires initiation of the innocent. And so you're going to face the same challenges that I face in communicating this to other people who are not aware and don't know how to wield it and to think about it. And because they're not used to thinking about Langer epistemology errors. We have all grown up with our physiology and our language such that using abstractions has become so familial that we don't think about it. We don't recognize that our physiology is producing abstractions for our brains, and we don't understand how that's disconnected us really from reality. And so we talked about that in some of the earlier videos, but so just, you have to kind of get ready to face these challenges, and hopefully this set of charts will help you to think about some of those things and begin to pull together the familial modes so that everybody gets on has the ability to wield unification, and you're going to be the one to have to pull these innocent people to that precipice. As with all things in new terms and usage, anytime there's something new, there's going to be new terms to learn and new applications of existing terms. So make sure that you do your due diligence and your the rigor that's necessary to really wield these details. And again, not trying to sell the other videos, but they are important. They do serve a purpose, and it does take some effort to go through them, I know, but going through them is necessary. The essential skills for communications, there's really not anything on the left side of this chart that's new in terms of communication skills. But what is new is the meaning and the underlying meaning and the kind of the fundamentals of communications. And the operative word here is context. Is when we built, you'll see in the framework that one of the things that we have is this unification tool, and it allows us to document all the different definitions for the different plurality of models that gets used, and we then we have to use a model that closes, and closure is one of the C's in the realm of C's. There are words, we'll get to those in a minute, but there are words like cogent and coherent and cohesive. And so you have to be able to use all of those concepts in terms of how you articulate the different elements of your given investigation. And you want to be personable, and you want to be confident, etc. These are all normal things that people use for communications to make sure that they are in fact communicating with other people. On the right set of bullets is, you have to make sure that people, the perspective that they are coming at you from, that everybody understands which encapsulated interpretive model is providing that basis. And so they may be coming, at you from an M1 perspective, for example, and you're trying to articulate the insights from an M5 perspective. And so you have to have a means in order to have that discussion. And the tools and techniques and processes of elegant reasonism provide exactly that framework. That's the purpose of that framework. And you can document it, and you can use all the ISO 9000 standards, system standards if you want. And then there's the different domains of discourses. I mean, as soon as you utter the word unification, people start thinking theoretical physics. But I can tell you that it's a great deal larger than any single discipline of science. And so the different domains of discourses that different people have that are in your investigation and as a function of your investigation. You want to try and not make things too broad. You want to bring them in as narrow as you can, but at the same time, you have to make sure that they are in the context of unification. And so, when you're establishing an investigation, you obviously have people that are providing you the objectives and probably the goals for that investigation and those discussions. And you have to make sure that everybody understands where those goals and objectives came from, which fundamental interpretive basis is providing that perspective. And so you're probably going to have to mode shift those as well. And so, there's going to be this is not a linear process. Communications on something like this never is. You have to have a give and take. You have to be able to go back in an iterative fashion to make sure that that really people understand and that we gain cognition on what it is we're actually trying to accomplish. And throughout all of that discussion, there are going to be Langer epistemology errors being committed. And everybody involved is going to have to understand that. And they're going to have to know that they may not know what the answer is, but they're going to have to know that that's what they're doing, that they are committing those kinds of errors. And they have to understand what the implications of that are. And I wouldn't look at it necessarily as a challenge, although it is. I would look at it as an opportunity, because when you realize that you are making those errors, what you have to ask yourself is, what am I not seeing because I'm making these errors? And when you realize that there is something to see and you couldn't see it before because you were making those errors, you get motivated beyond any kind of thing that, in my experience, and it's really an exciting thing to do. And the first time you uncover an insight that you couldn't see because you were making these errors, it's going to really excite you and it's going to really drive you forward, and you're going to start yelling yippee and running down the halls and getting really excited. When you can have a conversation with management or maybe with stakeholders or shareholders or somebody, and you can demonstrate logically correct scenarios that are simultaneous with one another. So you can have multiple ways of describing how a given physical property may manifest itself, given the different interpretive models. It's pretty exciting to do. And you can see the light bulbs pop on in your audience, and you can see them starting to get excited about what we might be able to do because we did that. So, this last bullet in the lower right corner of this chart, they're all linked back into the website. So I would encourage you to register and log in and go through the website. But philosophy has, these four kind of areas that were centrally involved in, at least in the development of unification. Epistemology are things like empiricism and rationalism and constructivism, and we have now added elegant reasonism as a fourth one there. And elegant reasonism is kind of a superset epistemology, in as much as we include empiricism and rationalism and constructivism in there, and everything, all of it gets statistically weighted. And when you understand how to apply the analytic stack of translation matrices, for example. Nature, the philosophy of nature, is what science used to be called. There was, about 300 years ago or so, there was a schism between science and philosophy as people started using laboratories and experiments, and empiricism became the predominant guiding thinking, developing truth, because it was kind of obvious. Human physiology and our senses could see something. It was easy to replicate something for somebody else to do, because all human physiology responds the same way, because it works the same way. And therefore, empiricism became really the only driving truth behind science. Little did we know we were committing Langer epistemology errors, because our physiology is structured such that it automatically provides the brain with abstractions in order for us to relate to the world around us. And so when we realize that, and we pull that together in this framework that we now have, and the analytics stack underneath it, we can get beyond those limitations, because we did that. And when we do that, we realize that the subject of unification has to be a philosophical predicate priority consideration entering science. It was not something you find out after the fact. You have to go into science understanding what those requirements of unification are. And once you do that, and you apply that with the framework that we have with elegant reasonism, then you can start establishing an ability to mode shift things between empiricism and elegant reasonism pretty much on the fly and dynamically. It's pretty powerful capability. And the more you do it, the more you'll see what I'm talking about, and you'll be able to wield that. Ontology is the philosophy of being, and it's just as we get more into biology and we understand the structure of not only our own physiology, but biological systems as a whole, those subjects will be explored a great deal, I'm sure. Axiology is the philosophy of value derivation. You get into this because people hold value today because of status quo thinking. And status quo thinking is predominantly guided by empiricism. And if you come at somebody who is entrenched in that mode of thinking, they are not going to hold much value in whatever you're having to say. And so you have to have this whole discussion about unification and blah, 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 and why it's important, and and then mode shifting and going back and forth, and they're going to look at you and their eyes are going to glaze over and they're not going to know what you're talking about. And so we have to find a way to have people hold value in unification. Truth as a function of the unified universe has got to be the predominant source of value derivation, and that's the philosophy of axiology. That's what axiology is all about. Langer epistemology errors. Like I said, these occur when we mistake abstractions for reality. These errors can be fatal flaws in epistemological thinking, exactly because they preclude elimination of logic artifacts, concept compression issues, and those kinds of situations. We really run into logic artifacts in a number of ways, mostly from science, I guess, but I don't know that that's necessarily true, but I know that in science we run into them all the time. They are small incongruencies. They're things that we rationalize away, maybe offhandedly. One that I can think of off the top of my head is the inability to use a single geometric basis point for all real objects in a given reference frame. we find ways to explain why we don't need to do that, and it makes sense to us in the context of the interpretive model that we are using, and everybody in the room kind of pats themselves on the back and says, yeah, okay, I get that. Let's move on and let's have the discussion that we're all here for. That whole scenario, that whole situation is a clue. That whole situation is a logic artifact that needs to be paid attention to in a larger scheme of thinking. And that's what this framework brings. These types of mistakes ensnare the human psyche inside logic traps, and it insulates and isolates from being able to perceive the real scenarios and solutions. We name them for Suzanne K. Langer, who wrote a book called Philosophy in a New Key in 1948, and it's the story about her and things are all on the website, and you can log on and see that there, and you can review some material about Philosophy in a New Key, and see in her own words how she came up with this. But she's was a brilliant person. I wished I'd had an opportunity to meet her, but that didn't happen. To understand logical, and we'll get into this some more later, but to be able to distinguish a logically correct system from physical reality, demanding that the unified universe always and without exception is held litmus. So when you read the actual patent that we filed, you'll see that we said the objective is to get to be able to perceive and engage the real unified universe. And that's true, but we never actually want to say that we are describing the unified universe. And the reason we don't want to say that, like, for example, I could say that the emergence model describes the unified universe and blah, 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 and I could go tell you what those details are. But what I really need to tell you is that the emergence model reflects the unified universe, and it is a reflection of that. And it doesn't mean that there won't be another better reflection of it. And we always want to be able to hold nature, the actual real reality, as litmus. So that, and the distinction there, it's a very fine line, but the distinction that we are making is in order not to make these kinds of errors. We always want to make sure that we are working with our abstractions, we know what they are, and that we can kind of hold them to the side and look over at reality and say, is this a good reflection? Yes, no, tweak it here and tweak it there, and then we'll go back and look at nature again. And, is it behaving like we think it should behave? And it's that fine line that we're trying to articulate here, and that we have these different, we have a plurality actually of encapsulated interpretive model definitions, and each one must be quantified, codified, and documented. And that's why we call status quo thinking in science today is typically something we call M1, and this kind of pulling all of that together and being able to label it M1 gives us a very easy way to refer to it. The kinds of thinking and patterns that are associated with the emergence model we typically refer to as M5 because it's a different interpretive model, and there's models in between those two. And then we take all of that and we juxtapose them against paradigms of nature, and one of those models has to close. And then when we put it on top of that analytical stack, it gives us an ability to work with the different abstractions. It gives us a chance to characterize the philosophical symbology that's employed, and it gives us a chance to employ unification as a philosophical predicate priority consideration entering science. So we take that, we understand it, we have the framework, and then we go into our scientific method with that in play. And it's a vastly different approach than the approach that we are using today pretty much anywhere on Earth. And that includes CERN and SLAC and Fermilab and Los Alamos and other places that you may have heard about in R&D, and probably is a different approach than occurs in almost every university across the planet. But we have to start changing that. We have to get on top of this. We have to make sure that we understand what logic artifacts. I gave you an example of a logic artifact a minute ago with geometric basis points. A concept compression issue. Most of these that I've come up with in our original systems review had to do with cosmology kinds of things. The one example that I'll give you here is BX442 is a grand design spiral galaxy, and it's in the Hubble ultra deep field image, and it's one of the galaxies that's the furthest away from us as possible. The problem is that grand design spiral galaxies take an inordinate amount of time to form, and the amount of time where it is almost as far away as the universe is perceived to be old, and there's not time between the Big Bang and today given where that galaxy is for it to have formed. So there's not enough time for it. So there's a bunch of concepts that get compressed that have to occur faster than we think they can occur because of its location and the time since we think that in M1 thinking how the universe formed. We can reconcile all that. We in fact have an article on the website called Bang to Bang, and we can describe the universe from a Big Bang potentially to the subsequent bangs and how that all transpires. We can explain galactic acceleration. We can explain gravitation using gravitons. So anyway, there's a different... Anyway, so that's how concept compression issues. I don't want to get into all that other detail, but that's anything that, if it's something that exists where it does, and it probably, given our understanding of how that all occurs, should not be there because there's not time enough for it to have formed, given the circumstances. And we have to quickly rationalize how that came to be. That's a concept compression issue. And if you read an article and it gets very declaratory, and it says, well, this is the way it is because this is the way it's always been, and this is how we're going to do this, and because so-and-so said this is this way, and there's no consideration for Langer epistemology errors, there's no consideration for encapsulation of interpretive models, then those are clues that you're dealing inside of a logical interpretation that's probably part of a logic trap somewhere. And you want to be very skeptical of those kinds of articles. On the other hand, when you read an article like that, and it is that way, there's an opportunity for you to take that and run it through the framework and mode shift it. And, develop insights because of that article. The article may be a very salient, powerful article on some aspect of science or engineering or could even be business operations. But and it may be very, very, very salient. But there's also going to be, and if you know that they are committing Langer epistemology errors, and you know that they are dealing with thinking that cannot close to unification, then that spells opportunity. It spells opportunity to mode shift that and take those insights and make those insights your own, and run forward with that. There's a huge opportunity here, and once you understand how to wield elegant reasonism, and you understand how these things came to be, you can very readily pick these things out and run with it and mode shift them. You're probably going to be like me and have more of them you can do than you can do. There's just not enough time in the day, especially given where we are, current course and speed. If somebody is incessantly elaborating, or they're articulating elaborate rationalizations for inabilities or incongruence in thinking, that's another clue that they're having to deal with logic artifacts and Langer epistemology errors. And the best example I can give you is a geometric basis point for all real objects. The space-time mass interface precludes a real object transiting that interface because it gets turned into energy. And once you do that, it loses its ability to be referenced by geometry across various real objects. And that's fundamentally why nobody with status quo thinking is ever going to be able to achieve unification, because they can't. Those constructs preclude being able to use a single geometric basis point, and that's just one aspect of unification. But so anyway, those are the clues. That's what Langer epistemology's errors are. That's where they came from, and we named them after Suzanne K. Langer in her honor. This other thing we call the realm of C's really came from business planning. When you write a business plan, the business plan has to be cogent, has to be coherent, has to be cohesive, has to be communicative, it has to be consistent, etc. And so as we started writing down these C words, it just became easier to talk to them as a group instead of individually. And so I used to do a lot of business planning stuff for the corporate America, and that's where these came from. And it just became natural to apply them here. So when we're developing a treatise that is aligned with the unified universe, all these words have to come into play, and they have to be able to be traced back through the translation matrices using ISO standards on quality management metrics, and you do that for large scale formal treatment of things, so that you can hand it off to other people and they will understand where the information came from and why it is and why it's applicable to this model or that model. And when I say that, I mean encapsulated interpretive models. So you might have a set of insights that are M1 based. You need to mode shift them to M5 to understand an experiment or an investigation that you're doing, and you have to mode shift those back and forth, and you need to be able to explain that to your stakeholders in a formal setting. You're going to need to use ISO standards, and that's typically going to mean 9001, which is quality management metrics. We have an ISO 9001 unification tool that we use for, or can be used for that purpose. The actual tool is on the website. Just register and go get it and use it if you want to. You can build your own tool if you want to. It doesn't really matter. We have one. It's there. It's available. If you want to use it, doesn't cost anything. But you have to be able to document the definitions that you're using. And then we have another tool called a translation matrices that's described in earlier videos, and it's all on the web, and you can go through that. Translation matrices, you can think of it as a transmission in a car, maybe, to be able to go from one model to the next and see how the patterns of relationships change in order for a given paradigm of nature to be made manifest. And then once the translation matrices is kind of complete and you have your insight development, then you can work on your treatise for your investigation. And looking at a translation matrices that's completed at the tail end of an investigation is different than working through it and working to complete it. You're going to come up with many aha moments and insights, and you're going to go, holy cow, this is great, and you get all excited as you're developing it. But when you're finished and you can back up from it and you can look at it, and then you can mode shift M1 to M5 for a given paradigm, and you start to experience the power in being able to do that, is when your treatise development is going to come into its own, and you're going to be able to write that down. And that's when you're going to have to come back to this realm of C's and make sure that each one of these things is being applied appropriately. And in subsequent presentations and how you articulate the subject for your particular investigation. And this last bullet here is having developed the emergence model, I want to hesitate a little bit, and I'm doing this on purpose, because knowing what the emergence model needs and knowing what unification demands, the skill set that systems engineering brings to the table is invaluable. I hesitate to say that it's a derivative of the emergence model, because it is almost as much a derivative of the requirements for unification as anything else. But the emergence model, the way that that's built, says that everything real is a system or system of systems. And to really understand how those things are made manifest in terms of gathering requirements and defining the concepts that are involved in a given investigation that you may be working on, really requires systems engineering principles, practices, and the profession. I can't understate that enough. And the professional organization that bird dogs that around the world is something called INCOSE, I-N-C-O-S-E, or S-E. And so, INCOS, International Committee on Systems Engineering. So go look at incosi.org, and you'll see that, and that's where that link goes when you click it. So the communication issues, this is now slide 8 in this deck. These are not new issues. When I was working on the development of all this, I thought this stuff was new. I had no idea that Plato had written about it 2,600 years ago, or however long ago that was. But he actually articulated almost the same sets of issues in Book 7 of the Republic, using his allegory of the cave. And when you click that link there, it will take you to a video that discusses that allegory. And it's on our playlists on the SolREI Studios channel on YouTube. The quest for unification might be over, but now, is where all the real work starts. Because now we have to mode shift what it is we thought we knew into these new insights that we have. The good news is we don't have to start over, but the challenge is there's a lot of work to do. And the operative word is context, is understanding how that changes model to model to model. And to do that, we need the framework and the epistemology of elegant reasonism. And we do that because we need to maintain situational awareness as we try and perceive and engage the unified universe. And it requires a multidisciplinary approach. You cannot go into this thinking, I'm a theoretical physicist and I'm going to go do blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the kind of the rub with all that. Once you're able to describe, as we did the bang-to-bang thing of the mechanics of the astronomical kinds of things, you are then forced to say, okay, well, what about all the stuff that's here on Earth? What about biology? What about economics? What about da-da-da-da-da-da? If you can describe the entire universe bang to bang, that necessarily means and requires that you're able to connect all these other things back into it. And if you can't do that, then you really haven't accomplished anything. And so thinking that you're going to come up with some physics formula for the Big Bang is not seeing the forest for the trees. And so elegant reasonism actually does do that. It gives you an ability. So, for example, we're able to connect, and I was stunned when we were able to do this, but action. When you go and read the cogent paragraph for M5, the emergence model, and you understand how action comes into play, we then fell into, we stubbed our toe on a treatise on economics called Human Action. And it was written by a guy named Ludwig von Mises. And we were able to very quickly, almost effortlessly, connect his work with elegant reasonism. And when we did that, we suddenly realized we had just connected the entire body of economics into this thing that accomplishes unification. To say that that's powerful is an understatement. Anyway, that's another story for another day. But you have to understand how commission of Langer epistemology errors ensnares humans into believing that they are working directly with nature, when in fact they are dealing with abstractions of it. It is an intrinsic feature of human physiology that we do this. It's just how we're built. Can't change it. Not going to try and explain why. I understand why, but it is what it is, and now we got to figure out how to deal with it. So we got to cope, adapt, and move on. There's a subject called knowledge management that we need to recalibrate for the different detail sets within encapsulations, because until we understand how Langer epistemology errors manifest many of the things that are in like M1, and how they are different in M2, and they're different in M3, M4, M5, and M6. And that we have to pull up into a holistic arrangement to understand that means that the subject of knowledge management, that discipline, that information science discipline, now needs to be recalibrated in context of elegant reasonism, as opposed to the status quo thinking on which it is currently based. So let's talk a little bit about knowledge management. It is a relatively recent field from information scientists in the IT industry. When somebody uses that word, they more often talk about a given application, usually in some large corporation, and they usually use it for HR in terms of how they deploy skills across, big business projects. There's a distinction between, and many people don't understand this, that if you ask people, is the material contained inside a large computer, is that information or is it knowledge? And many people in the IT industry will tell you, oh, well, that's knowledge. Well, no, it really isn't. It's not knowledge until it's contained inside of an entity that can take independent action on it in subsequent scenarios that are independent of when it learned it. And today, that more often than not means a human being must possess that between their ears. They have to have it in their head. They have to have assimilated, acquired it. They have to be cognizant of the implications of it. You could use the word inculcate, but that implies a degree of force that I'm not sure is relevant. But the point is that there's a distinction between data, information, and knowledge, and it requires and demands an interface for human beings to interact with that information so that it might be assimilated into knowledge so that individuals may then apply that across the enterprise. Now, the good news about elegant reasonism is that the framework and the approach, if it's done right, creates education roadmaps so that people can understand how they need to think about something that may have come from status quo M1 position over to M5 position. And in an enterprise, that's going to be critical and vital relative to mode shifting their business plan for the future. And so the way that this whole framework is structured is that I won't say it automatically because it requires a lot of work, but it is intrinsically set up to divine out the education roadmaps that are needed in order to take people from the M1 world and realm into the M5 world and realm. And we can do that with information sciences. We can actually apply a lot of software technology to translation matrices. We can actually build translation matrices within software systems to help do this and carry this information and then turn it into knowledge for our people so that natural humans and AI to a degree, and as AI is able to gain independence from energy sources or large computer rooms and move about, then they would be included in that as well. That gets kind of scary, though. That's another subject, too, for another day. The ethics and how we do this must be isotropic. It must be the same for people as it is for all the AI. The AI cannot have any advantage that people don't have and are not given. And I can't stress that enough. The ethics have to be isotropic. And to the degree that they're not isotropic, somebody somewhere is being manipulated. Information science-based KM needs to be done in the context of human resource management. And I mentioned here too, Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, and we talk about that on the website quite a bit. Back when I was in corporate America, I dealt with knowledge management. I was the knowledge management go-to person within my my profession area worldwide. And anyway, all of that is where this law came from. And it basically says knowledge will never penetrate population faster than a Kelvin wake. If rapid knowledge dissemination is required, the answer is more ducks on a pond, not bigger ships carrying it. And that may sound a little esoteric maybe, but the point is that if you've ever seen a duck on a pond, the angle of the wake behind the duck, that's a Kelvin wake. But the angle of that, off that duck swimming through the pond is exactly the same as the angle of the wake off of an aircraft carrier in the ocean. And the point there is that if the wake is analogous to knowledge penetrating the population, then you need more ducks creating wakes, not a bigger ship, because the wake is going to have the same angle. So that's kind of the point of that law. And it's relevant if you're trying to communicate the results of your investigation to a body of people. It's better to understand this and integrate this into your communications approach, because you need more people telling the same story, not one big event to go do it. So it's better to one person to train two people who train two people who train two people, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how that works. And so start small, stay cogent, stay in the realm of C's, make sure everybody's on the same page, working off the same set of data, same set of information. So as you apply knowledge management with elegant reasonism, elegant reasonism has to be present at every step and stage of the framework, the epistemology, and expected to be intrinsic to any fully compliant treatise that's aligned with the unified universe. Data and information may be communicated, but knowledge transfer requires teaching and learning. So just because you stand by a podium and talk does not mean that people in the audience are learning. You have to do extra work to make sure that the people that are listening to you are getting it and then turn around and apply it. And that requires a different set of effort, a different kind of thinking for the person doing the communicating. So as you look down the list of facets for elegant reasonism, applied KM should be evident, because the whole framework establishes a way to document all the various relationships. We even apply Bayesian analytics and statistics to things so that you can do integrate belief systems, and you can do it before, during, and after the investigation. And you have a way to integrate actual mathematics with some of that, and show people that there's more than one way to accomplish the same thing, and that everybody can be wary of simultaneous truths. Just because what somebody said is true does not mean that there's not another way to say the same thing, accomplish the same result in a completely different manner. And it does not invalidate that other way. It just means that you now have to come together and say that, here, okay, there's these two different ways to do this. Which one is more relevant and germane to our investigation, what we have to do, and what our mission and objective is. AI is in there. We've already talked about that. I'm not going to cover that too much. You want to try and stay away from logic traps to the degree that you can. You can pick up any modern article, or once you understand how to mode shift and you understand unification, you're going to be able to pick up an article and start and just quickly scan it, and you'll be able to see the declarative statements that are being made about nature. and you'll probably be able to start mode shifting those in your mind fairly quickly, and you'll understand how to wield translation matrices and what that may mean for your insights that you need to develop. But you want to be cognizant that these logic traps, and if you don't know what a Mobius loop is, it's like if you cut a rubber band so that you now have one long piece, and you rotate one end 180 degrees and then connect them back together and glue them together, you can trace both sides, and it only has one side. It's just now doubled in length. So that's kind of a Mobius loop. You can keep walking forever, and you'll never get out of that loop. Logic traps require specific types of questions in order to discern and suggest subsequent contemplation and action. So you can, somebody could come up with a really brilliant article. They can even write about the GPS constellation and tell you all about relativistic time dilation, and they take all these things in consideration. At the end of the day, you can say, does all of that close to unification? And when they say no, that's when you start mode shifting that, and you can start seeing some different kinds of insights that develop as a function of that. And you start thinking about things you didn't think about before. And it's a pretty insightful thing. But anyway, the point here relative to communications is that if your predominant thinking that underlies everything is a fundamental foundational construct, do not close to unification, that's a clue that you need to start asking a whole range of other questions. And that's where the elegant reasonism framework comes into play. And that's where the processes of how you develop those insights come into play. And so I would encourage you to go back through whatever it is you're doing in your life and see what insights you can see and see how many aha moments you can collect. If you're like me, you're going to collect a lot of them. The reason we use ISO 9000, 9001, and the rest of the ISO standards is really for large enterprises and industry and international communications more than it is anything else. Because you can do this framework very simply, in your study or at home with a piece of paper and a pencil and a blackboard or maybe a whiteboard. You don't have to use all this other stuff. But if you do need to do a large formal review, then the ISO standards come into play, and you can quantify and codify all this stuff and go through this with great detail. At the same time, you don't want to get into analysis paralysis either. It doesn't have to be that hard. But if you need it to be that hard because the project is large and very expensive and there's a lot of people involved and you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page, then elegant reasonism will come into its own and will support that effort to the degree you need it to do. And an example of that is probably LIGO in Louisiana and Washington. You can the caution I would tell you here about metrics is to make sure that you're mode shifting your metrics, and make sure that mode shifted metrics result in supporting the same paradigm of interest in the same way. Because if you mode shift a metric and it evaporates, it's not serving any purpose. Actually, the purpose that it serves is not the intended purpose. If you're able to mode shift a metric and it evaporates, then it's a clue that your metric was not very. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was a self-deluding kind of situation. So you want to make sure that your metrics are being employed properly, and that you're not stuck in any kind of logic trap, and that everything, when you mode shift it, the patterns are supported or supporting the correct paradigm of interest or paradigm of nature that you're looking for or looking at. The unified universe always remains litmus. You never want to say, I am describing the unified universe. What you want to say is, I'm describing a model and it reflects the unified universe. We think with very high affinity. We've been testing the emergence model now for over 16 years. We can't find where it breaks. That doesn't mean it doesn't break. I just can't find it anywhere. Every time we test it, it only gets stronger. Now, does that mean somebody else is not going to be able to come up with a different model somewhere else? No. They might be able, think of something I didn't think of, but and that's fine. But the framework is probably not going to change much. It may, when you look at the analytics stack, you may add more things to it, but that's only going to strengthen it. That's only going to make it better. Being able to cross-check data and information to establish a stronger affinity and context, that's always a good thing. But you just simply do not want to cross that line that takes you into the potential for commission of a Langer epistemology error. Because if you do that, you may get just as lost as the people who thought the earth was flat. So you just don't want to do that. Knowledge barriers. In business, there's a thing called a barrier to entry. It's if there's a set of companies and they have a market pretty well sewn up, they want to make it harder for competitors to come in there and compete with them because it raises the cost of doing business. Knowledge barriers are analogous to those in the sense that they inhibit entry participation. But knowledge barriers are a bad thing. And I would probably argue that barriers to entry in business is a bad thing because it thwarts competition. Competition is a good thing because it lowers costs. The danger here, though, is that if you're inside of a logic trap, and that logic trap, for example, is M1 and holds sway over status quo thinking, it's very difficult to deal with the belief systems that result from that in order to get people to see insights that are based on the unified universe. And at that point, people cease listening and they begin to formulate rationalized objections. Such objections may not be voiced. They will simply try to, basically what they'll do is they'll ignore you. They'll just stop listening to you. And they'll pat you on the head and say, yeah, sure, okay, see you later, talk to you later, bye. You just don't know what you're talking about. When in fact, you're the one with the insights and they're stuck in their glass bottle on their little ship in the bottle, and they don't understand that they're inside of a logic trap and they're never going to get out unless they are open to a larger point of view. And that's one of the challenges you have as a communicator, is to make sure that you can, there's a skill that I call staying present, is when you want to stay present with somebody that's trying to inundate you with objections. And you have to stay there and weather the objections, and they may be pretty intense, and some people will get very angry and they will call you all kinds of names, and they may make it personal, but you can't take it personally, because they're coming from their experience and their life experience, and maybe they're very vested in their how they got to where they are. They spent a lot of money. They got all these PhDs and credentials, and that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, they're not able to take out one piece of paper and write one paragraph that can describe the entire universe in all its glory. You can. You can. And you can back that all up. And so you want to be cognizant of these things. You want to take them into account, but you want to go back to the listening skills at the earlier chart, and you want to try and stay present in the conversation. And that's going to be critical for effective communications. You want to make sure that you're aware of the logic traps involved. You want to make sure that you're aware of them, both ones that you may have and that the people in your audience may have. You want to understand which model they're based on, where they're coming from. That'll help you stay present. The problem with logically correct knowledge barriers is that the success that they often have blinds people to the correct path forward. We have had great successes by all accounts. The status quo thinking today is the most powerful interpretation of the universe in the history of humanity. And that's all true, but it cannot close to unification. There is another way to look at things, and it's called the emergence model. And the emergence model is the result of looking at status quo thinking using elegant reasonisms, framework, and epistemology in order to develop what is now M5 and M6. And, an example is the flat earth believers, and the heliocentric theory is another one, where people thought that the sun revolved around the earth, and the luminiferous ether, prior to 1910. Elegant reasonism as an epistemology. An epistemology is a philosophy of knowledge. It's how you rationalize it. It's how you justify it. It's how you consolidate it, and you have a holistic view of what it is you think you know. The challenge we have is that empiricism, rationalism, and constructivism all have as a common thread human physiology. Human physiology is designed to provide the human system with abstractions in order for it to relate to the world around it. And we have to be able to get beyond that. An abstraction has a tendency to insulate and isolate higher ordered ideas from lower ordered detail. And what that does is the abstractions that we employ in everyday conversation and familial surroundings allows us to get to work in the morning, do work during the day, come home, meet with family, and play with kids, and all that. But it does not get to existence. It does not get to the reality of the cosmos. It does not get to our place in the universe. To do that requires a larger, more powerful framework, and that framework is elegant reasonism and the epistemology that it supports. So the epistemology of elegant reasonism seeks truth as a function of the unified universe. It employs an analytical framework that's capable of deriving and fishing all of that out. It illuminates not just what closes to unification, but what does not. And probably more important, or at least as important, is why it does not. It allows us to create roadmaps, education roadmaps, to go from point A to point B. So we know where the status quo thinking failed before, how the emergence model reconciles that. We can build an education roadmap that says for new students and our progeny, our kids, this is how to think about these kind of things. And our grandchildren are going to be able to inherently wield elegant reasonism just as a matter of course. They're probably going to think that way. And the reason I say that is that the neural networks that are an intrinsic part of the human physiology, you are able to reconfigure those by thinking about things a different way. And once you get to understand what all the deeper implications of all that are, you come up with NNRP, which is neural networks by reconfiguration programming. It's like NLP. It's just it's a mode shifted version of that, if you will. Brodmann areas there's about 52 or 47, depending on, the stage of development. I mean, the original, I think, covered 47 areas. There's now 52 areas of the central nervous system's brain that cover different functions of the brain and how it works. They're on the website. Bayesian analytics integrates the belief systems. The statistical analysis talks about relative and respective metric potentials and how you bring that all to bear. The logic calculus. When you see the analytics stack, all of these things are in the analytics stack of a translation matrices. But it allows us the ability to stand in front of an audience and say, yes, I know what we thought was true before. Here's what we believed before. Here are the insights that we mode shift through the framework. Here's how M5 sees those same things, how they relate. They are simultaneously true. Here are the insights we get as a function of being able to do that mode shifting work. Here is what we can understand as a function of the unified universe that we could not see before because we were stuck inside of a logic trap. These are cogent. These are insights that conform to the realm of C's, and we can tie it all back to what it is we thought we knew before, but now we have deeper insights. And so that's really what this is all about. And it's just a capability of having compliant investigations and roadmaps for how we got there. Because at the end of the day, the scientific method requires us to duplicate and replicate what it is we did and do that in a relative and respective manner. Einstein, amazingly and maybe ironically enough, said that we cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And he had no idea how right he was. The model that he created is logically correct. And therein lay its strategic flaw. It was logically correct. And we did great things with it. The problem is that it was only logically correct. And it does not close to unification, but unification is not something he was trying to solve when he did it. And he said that too. So I think he's one of the most brilliant people ever. Anyway, so that is what it is. But so the answer, I mean, we all fell prey to Langer epistemology errors. It's kind of a shame that Einstein and Langer did not meet. I mean, her book came out while he was still alive, I believe, but I don't believe he ever saw it, and I don't think he ever certainly didn't understand what it was saying. But we have the same situation today as they had then. But success should never be used to denigrate new ideas. Richard Feynman talks about that a lot. He always said, make room at the bottom. And both successes and failures must be subjected to elegant reasonism in order for us to learn and move forward, so that we can make sure that we are getting the most out of what it is we think we know, in a dynamic and iterative manner. You want to incorporate systems engineering processes, skills, and practice to the degree that you can. I would encourage existing systems engineers to have a more open mind to systems now that are not anthropogenic systems. Systems engineers historically focus on anthropogenic systems, which means, computer systems that are made by humans. I shouldn't say them all, I don't want to stereotype, but a large percentage of professional systems engineers shy away from and will distance themselves from other kinds of systems. Even though there's an affinity of relationships and skills and practices that's kind of obviously there, but there was no framework prior to elegant reasonism for those systems, but now there is. And so I would encourage people to have a broader view of systems engineering than we've had in the past. I would also suggest that information scientists or sciences as a discipline within the sciences to embrace elegant reasonism for guidance. And you can read these other bullets yourself. I don't need to talk to those. I think they're pretty self-evident. But the one takeaway there that was really hard to come to was that unification needs to be a philosophical predicate priority consideration entering science. There's a great video, and it's on the website that I use often, of Richard Feynman saying that if you have two theories and they're both come up with they're both simultaneously true, they both conform to experiment, they both, but they develop differently. Science. There's no way for science to tell you which of those is the right way or the best way, because they both agree with experiment. They both describe everything, and that's kind of the point here, is that we now do have a way for science to ask questions that those two methods may not have been able to do before. We can ask, does A or B, which of those closes to unification? If A does not and B does, there's your answer. So the difficulties in communication are really in the preconceived notions of your audience. Communicators are encouraged to find innovative ways to get people beyond normal thinking. I don't remember where on the website it is, but I have an image of a glass, and if you just superficially glance at it, it appears to be half full of water. And inevitably people think, oh, he's going to talk about optimism and pessimism when I show it. And we have that discussion, and then I point out that actually this glass is an optical illusion. The image has been rotated 180 degrees to make it appear as if the glass is upright, and that what you see in the bottom of the glass and perceive as water is actually an air bubble, and the entire glass and everything is immersed in a clear liquid, and the air glass, the bubble in the air in the glass is holding the glass to the bottom, what actually is the ceiling, in the image. And the point there is you have to look at very fine details. Somebody who is very astute could look at the meniscus of the water inside the glass and say, oh, wait, that's going the wrong way. It's inverted. So there are very small details that will give you clues to the situation not being what you think it is. And you have to pay attention to those very small details in order to make sure that you have the larger picture. And that's kind of the point of that glass picture. It is the small clues that tell you you're in a logic trap. It is the small clues that tell you about compression issues. It is the small details. Because this center bullet here is that, and I'm going to read it, something can be logically correct yet remain physically different. Logically correct experiments, conducted in logically correct manners, immersed in logically correct encapsulated interpretive models, will almost certainly deliver logically correct results, and that has absolutely nothing necessarily to do with anything other than the logical correctness with which every aspect was considered and conducted. The physical underlying reality may remain different. A different model, also simultaneously logically correct, may deliver just as valid results. And the salient question then is, which model closes to unification the best? And that's how you tell the difference between Richard Feynman's A and B that he uses in that video. You go to the website and you'll see it there. Mode shifting then is the phrase when you're switching from one interpretive model to the next. And when you're in communications, I would predicate a paragraph that may be based in M1. I'd put in parentheses M1, then start your paragraph. So it helps your audience to know that's the basis of that paragraph. And if you're trying to talk about multiple models, then before that sentence, put in parentheses which model that concept is, or that assertion is being made, so that people can know in the same paragraph, oh, he's talking about multiple models there. And not to beat science stuff to death, but when you can go look at Newton's laws, for example, and ask, why is this law true and under Newton? And somebody may say, well, F equals ma, and say, well, under M1, that does answer that question. But when you mode shift that to M5, you see that F equals to ma is what happens, not why it happens. And the question was, why does this happen? And so the answers to what, when, why, where, and how may get changed as you mode shift, and those patterns may change. And so we just need to be careful here and just be cognizant of that as we're articulating that, so that when you're communicating a plurality of or a given set of circumstances with a plurality of interpretive models, it makes it a little more challenging, and you have to make sure that people are constantly on the same page. And you do that using, in our case, the Unification tool and the framework and things like translation matrices and ISO standards and documentation, etc. Yada yada, baba, woof woof, all that stuff. Remember that mode shifting changes the fundamental foundational context on which interpretations are based. You want to make sure that you are clear in your communications as you can be. We're all human. We all have our own styles. We all have our idioms and schisms and things we do when we're talking to people. But the framework allows this to be as effective as possible. The first illustration I'd like to give you is, any discourse on the evolution of communications inevitably involves the Rosetta Stone. And if you're not familiar with it, I think most people are, because it's in history classes, it's in communications classes, it's in all kinds of stuff. But it was a stele that was articulating a decree from Ptolemy that was written in 3 different languages. It was written in ancient hieroglyphics, it was written in Demotic, and then it was also written in ancient Greek. And fortunately for us all, there were only minor differences between the 3 different versions in the 3 different languages. And it was the key for Champollion to be able to crack the code on how to read hieroglyphics. And so we were able to go back to, across ancient Egypt and really read all of the hieroglyphics, primarily because of the Rosetta Stone. But the point of bringing that into play here is that the analogy of the Rosetta Stone, it's analogous to translation matrices, that top 2D articulation layer. So you articulate how some paradigm of interest is made manifest in M1, then you are required to say how that is made manifest in M2, and then you can do the same thing, in M5, etc. And when you do that, and you do that in detail, and then you take those articulations and subject them to that analytic stack that's underneath in the deeper parts of the translation matrices, and you have a predicated philosophical priority on unification, you start to very quickly see where the logic traps were. You start to very quickly see how to communicate to your particular audience and what their needs are. And so rather than languages being translated, we're translating reality. And we're doing it with as close an affinity to the unified universe as is humanly possible. That's the objective. In the analogy here, just to complete the analogy, is that Ptolemy's decree would be the paradigm of interest that's being translated. And so that kind of completes that analogy there. Illuminated illustration number 2 is let's just say that some speaker has to go to a university's board of trustees and talk about the implications of elegant reasonism to the academic programs that the university offers. It'll be important to convey the distinctions and insights without getting into any great detail. There's a number of bullets here that suggest different topics that might be used, but you want to keep them as simple as possible. You're going to be constrained by time. You obviously cannot get into any great detail. You cannot actually mode shift all these different discussions for the given audience. But what you need to say is that all of these subjects can be mode shifted. You need to give examples on the implications of some of them. You might even give this presentation to them, and maybe do it a lot quicker than I did it. But and you have this set of discussions just to know that, and it will give them some degree of comfort to know that they can be mode shifted, and that they are relevant to all these different kinds of students, whether you're in philosophy or whether you're in business, or whether you're in economics, you're an information science person, or you're a science person. All of these subjects are relevant regardless of the school within the university and the domain of discourse that school represents. Illustration number 3. Let's say that a speaker must give a talk to an investor group. So obviously there are, if you're in M1 and you're entrenched there and your detail set is vested, we'll say, then there are probably going to be what we'll call red herrings. Red herring is something that you're chasing, but you're never going to find it. You're never going to find it because M1 not only does not close to unification, it cannot close to unification. And so there are aspects of M1 thinking that will result in logic traps that dangle tasty clues in front of you, and you're chasing them thinking that you're going to tweak it and you're just going to get there if you do this one more thing. We just need this extra $5 million to go do this. We need this $2 billion to build this big whoozy fuzzle gray elephant thing, whatever it is. And you're just not going to find it. And you're not going to find it because the core constructs of M1 will never close to unification. Ever. And so from a business point of view and from a funding and investing point of view, you need to ask, are there projects that are yielding less than stellar results? Are the rationalizations as to why those results not achieving the promised integrity becoming increasingly elaborate or more involved? Because if they are, you're probably chasing a red herring, and you need to stop and think about things and let's see how we can maybe spend our money a better, more powerful way and more effective way and actually get the results we're looking for. Or maybe we need to recalibrate our expectations. Are there significant R&D efforts underway that consume incredible sums both of money and human resources, as well as capital funding, that are based on science that will never close to unification? What exactly does that tell management and leadership about those efforts? What would you change and why? How would the experiments be crafted differently in order to achieve a better alignment with unified insights, with the unified universe? Are there projects which should be scrapped outright? Are there new projects that you didn't think about that you should be doing that you're not doing because you didn't even think that they could be done? The same thing is true for businesses. And this is especially true for businesses involved in some degree of engineering. And the ultimate question has to do with derivation of value for your customers. Are you delivering the value that they need, and is that value a function of axiology immersed in elegant reasonism, or is it superficial and based in status quo thinking? What do we need to do differently in order to make that cogent going forward? And then once you do that for within your own organization, you have to explode that out to the entire business value chain. All your vendors, all your customers. What do your customers need? What do the people that are supplying you need for their business? And how does what they're doing affect what you're doing? There's a whole series of questions that you need to go through all the way through that value chain end to end. And that needs to be folded back against your business plan. And these are things that we do because that's the kind of company that we are. SolREI is. It is a strategic sustainability means an ability to endure, and an ability to endure means that you can do these things, and you can do these things dynamically, and you can do them with other people and other businesses and help them to understand how the way they used to be doing it needs to be mode shifted to go forward and maintain their competitive advantage. That's kind of what SolREI is all about. Okay, the fourth illustration is about a speaker who must give a talk to a postgraduate audience at a university and has been asked to discuss how elegant reasonism affects cosmology and astronomical sciences. I'm not going through all these different bullet points, but I will tell you that we can go through all these bullet points. I could go have this discussion with any university anywhere on Earth. We have done them already. And we did them as trying to get the emergence model to break. Really, we were trying to see if the way we were thinking about all this was wrong, and we said, okay, well, let's go do this, and okay, let's think about that. Okay, well, let's do this, and every time we did, the only thing that happened was that the emergence model got stronger, and it revalidated the elegant reasonism approach. It revalidated the framework and the analytic stack. And every single time we did it, we were just amazed, and we're now able to turn back around and say, you know what? We can mode shift all of this stuff. We can do this. We know how to do this. And the issue then becomes, now what? What do we do because we can do this? That's where the real work starts. And that's what I'm excited about. I'm real excited about where the future's going and what it means. I will tell you too, I don't think I put that on this chart, but we can also reconcile the Drake equation with the Fermi paradox. And I think we need to go back and revisit the Kepler data and those sets of systems that look like they're building Dyson spheres. I would assert that they probably, in fact, are building Dyson spheres. Because for a bunch of different reasons we're not going to get into in this presentation. But so anyway, we can do that. If somebody actually has to go do this and give this presentation, maybe we can build another video, another presentation that includes these things. But that's a subject for a different video. The fifth illustration is a speaker giving a talk to the Securities and Exchange Commission about the impact dynamics to listed enterprises, volatility, competition, and ethics going forward. I will tell everybody that we swapped some communications with the SEC and promised them that we would not pick winners and losers in the marketplace. That we want to put everything out in as neutral a manner as possible and let the marketplace seek its own level. The implications are powerful. And the second bullet is the most critical for enterprises to comprehend. And even if they don't comprehend it, they should take my word for this and go embrace elegant reasonism, because mode-shifted intellectual properties constitute net new assets because the insights are only apparent because of elegant reasonism illuminating the implications as a function of unification. The implication there is that the threat represented by competitors wielding elegant reasonism prior to the assigned owner takes that same action. That's the threat. And there's nothing you can do about it because a mode-shifted, somebody can take your patent off the USPTO system, mode-shift it, and then they have a net new asset that they can then go refile, and they will mode shift your intellectual property right out from under your feet, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The only thing you can do in defense of that is to wield elegant reasonism, mode shift it yourself, and file the new patent. That's the defense. And it's really kind of just that simple. But because it is just that simple, means that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have to learn that lesson the hard way. And I promise the SEC that we're going to tell people that that's the threat. We're going to let them understand that that's the threat, and let the marketplace seek its own level, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be in denial. They're like, oh, that can't be happening. And then somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to come in, knock on their door, and make it happen. And they're going to have to learn because they got a bloody nose. But anywho, it is what it is. So adding metrics to business assessments and analytics on the degree to which elegant reasonism impacts the enterprise and in what matter is another topic. And some of these things require consulting engagements to actually go through and do. It probably will not be a simple discussion, other than maybe to the degree that I'm having it with you guys. But also auditors and people conducting business reviews need to be aware of all these same issues, because the audit results, the reports that get generated as a function of those activities, need to reflect the competitive threat going forward, as well as the ability to derive value for the customer base. And so those are discussions that are powerful and that business leaders need to be acutely aware of, and the implications. And I would suggest too that if you're an investor and thinking about where to invest your money, these things are just as important. And do you invest it in company A or company B? If A has thinking in their organization that cannot close to unification, and company B does, where would you invest your money? So the competitive dynamics as a function of elegant reasonism and the implications for market impact and volatility are all going to be very, very salient conversations for all the business analytics news channels and all that kind of stuff in the media. They're going to start hyping this and trying to understand this and scratching their heads, I'm sure, and have all kinds of topics of the day and how that relates to this metric or that metric or this stock or that stock, and why they're playing out differently, and why investors are moving from one area of the economy to a different area. You know, everything from the effectiveness of batteries and vehicles to new fuels. The battery versus blue gas thing, for example, is a topic. You know, if you mode shift that whole paradigm, then anyway, those are examples. And so that's kind of some of the issues that I thought of off the top of my head relative to why communications is as difficult as it is. We all have preconceived notions about how things ought to work, and elegant reasonism kind of turns that on its head. But I hope this set of charts has helped. They are on the website, and I thank you for your time and appreciate your help. If you would, please click the subscribe button and click that little notification bell. And next time we come up with some more presentations, and I will tell you that I have 5 more that I'm working on right now. So the system will notify you when they come out. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Take care and have a good day.